Tonight's special guest is Keith Hunter. Keith is a well-known journalist, television producer and writer, and has turned his gaze on the Crewe murders. Just released this month, his new book is called The Case of the Missing Bloodstain. We welcome Keith Hunter as our special guest on The Beat Goes On. Welcome to The Beat Goes On, Keith Hunter. Thank you very much. Good to see you, Keith. Right. You've had a life of television, journalist, print media.
Mostly television, to tell you the truth, in various sorts of ways, but mostly journalism and documentaries and television and drama from time to time.
And you're here tonight because of the release of a brand new spanking book. It's called The Case of the Missing Bloodstain.
That's right.
Wonderful. A labour of love or a labour of great profit?
Not much profit in it. And I'm not sure about love. And it's, I guess, a duty. I mean, it's the sort of thing that I do, and I've been doing that sort of thing for a long time.
Investigative type journalism.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And if the story's there to be done, it's there to be done, so you do it.
We're going to get onto this, but first of all, we're going to talk about Keith Hunter first.
Oh, yeah.
Keith Hunter, name well known, known throughout New Zealand, and I can remember seeing one of your documentaries on the Scott Watson case.
Right.
Absolutely fabulous.
Murder on the Blade.
Yeah. Now that's 9 years ago. That was 2003, wasn't it?
That's
but
right.
It still sticks in my mind. So you did a magnificent job
Thank you.
on that particular night I saw it.
Now I followed that up with a book, you realise, don't you?
No, I don't know that.
Trial by Trickery, it's called.
Trial by Trickery.
That's about 2007. That's about 5 years ago.
Well, let's. This is about the Crewe murders,
yes.
but you're also let's spend a little bit of time on the Scott Watson, can we? What attracted you to that particular case?
Well, I was told about it. I was brought a book by a guy who lives on Waiheke that he was about to publish, and the suggestion was that I would make a documentary alongside the publication of the book, which I did. Although the film came out a bit later than his book did. And that was the beginning of it. And then I thought the film's fairly forthright, and I thought it would have an impact or an effect on the system. But
it had an impact on me. I thought it was brilliant.
Well, I think it had it changed. It seemed to change about 15% of the population's views of Scott Watson and whether he was guilty or not. According to a poll conducted by the Herald, prior to the playing of that film, 57% of the population thought he was guilty. After it played, that dropped to 42.
Wow.
So it was quite influential on everybody, but not the justice system.
Now, when you first started working on that film, what were your feelings about Scott Watson?
Well, I was concerned about it. There was a couple of things that happened right at the beginning when I was totally uninvolved. I just looked at it as another customer. And there were two things that bothered me. One was when, I don't know how well you know the case, but the police changed their pursuit of a two-masted ketch, a big boat, to a small one-masted boat, which was a sloop. And I thought that was a bit hairy when it happened. And then later on,
when the young boy the water taxi,
that's right, yeah.
He was positive it was the two-masted.
So were the others in the boat with him. So I mean, there's 100% witness verification that the Blade's the wrong boat. But the other thing was, a few months later, the news came out that this hatch cover in his boat Blade had all these scratches on it, and it was said that this was Olivia Hope trying to scratch her way out in a panic. And the hatch cover's up here above a cabin and above a bed. And I kind of put myself in the position of this person who's dying to get out, who's dead scared and wants to get out. And I tried to see myself scratching, and it didn't make sense to me. And then I thought myself as a drama director, directing an actress to do it, and I just couldn't make myself do it because it's so unreal. And then later on, I actually got 3 or 4 young girls to come along and I said, well, this is the situation, what are you going to do in this situation? None of them got anywhere near scratching the hatch cover. So they were in fact the two things that attracted to me the story in the first place.
So you created this great documentary which was so believable, and nothing really happened.
Nothing happened, no, that's right. And so because nothing happened, I wrote a book, thinking that would make something happen. Well, it might do in the end, because there's still an argument going on, which is the Watson story is a terrible, terrible story. I think it's the worst of in our judicial, the history of our judicial system. You couldn't get worse than what's going on with Watson. What went on in 1996, 97, and it's still going on.
Now, does it mean that they will cling on to the case because the reputation of the investigating officer, the person who's in charge of the investigation, his career is somehow blighted?
Well,
if it turns out that that they got the wrong man, is the establishment holds its position because so many things can change if they are seen to get it wrong? They are discredited and disgraced.
That is precisely what occurs.
Is that what happens?
In this case, in fact, the officer that ran the case has been discredited, and he's no longer in the police force. He became a deputy commissioner of police, number 2 in the force, and he lost his job one way or another about a year ago.
But not because of the Scott Watson.
Well, that's a very good question.
Yeah, okay.
I like to believe that it probably was what caused the problem. I had put in a complaint to the Independent Police Conduct Authority, and they were investigating that, and their report came out not too long afterwards, or it might have been a little bit before. And and they let him off. Now, it's very, considering the extraordinary lies this guy told, and the extraordinary, well, this is in the book, and he hasn't complained about it, about my saying that. The extraordinary job that he did, I thought that it might be they'd made a deal with him, that they let him off my complaint if he disappeared. Now, that's a guess. But,
well, look, the thing is this, that let's talk about your character as a person. Say I was a police officer and I was heading an investigation. I'm under pressure by the New Zealand public and the bosses to find a suspect. So you're caught between, well, he looks like a likely suspect. Nothing fits, but we'll arrest him and go through the process because we need action. So at that point, every man has to think to himself about integrity, about whether he pleases the baying wolves or he stands up for himself. No, I'm sure that person didn't do it. So the reason I'm bringing this up is it seems to be happening all the time. Look at all the cases that have been...
so many high-profile cases
been reinvestigated.
Which should be, but are not always reinvestigated. I mean, it took ages for David Doherty's case to come to notice, even when they had absolutely clear DNA evidence that it wasn't him involved in this thing. It took them forever to accept that. And it's not just to do with...
And there's the Arthur L. Thomas, of course, which we're going to talk about. And then there's the Ellis case in Christchurch.
In my view, there's Mark Lundy, there's John Barlow. There are just too many of them, and especially the high-profile ones seem to be where we have this sort of trouble. But it's not just the police; it's the whole system refuses to accept that it can make a mistake. It's a childish thing, in my view, that they can't actually sit down and say, "Look, we screwed this one up. Let's sort it out." We didn't screw it up. We're too good. No one else can get it right. Only us. Go away. And that's the attitude you get from them with all of these cases. Watson in particular. And it's happening with Watson now. There's still an attempt to keep him in prison, and they may well succeed in doing that against the evidence.
Watson could end up doing 15 years in jail.
He's done 12 or 13 already.
He's done 12, so another 3 will take it up to 15, which is about the normal amount of time?
They won't let him out until he's done 17 years, and as far as I'm aware, when he's done 17, he's got life after all, but a minimum of 17, he will then have to show remorse for what he did, and he didn't do anything, and he will have to tell everyone where the bodies are, which he doesn't know because he didn't do it. So there's a cleft stick, which they always bring out, these people who don't know what the system wants them to know, so they can't tell the system. David Tamihere is another one.
Oh, just suddenly thought of him while you were talking.
Exactly the same thing. I mean, the evidence against him was extraordinary, and the way the Court of Appeal just dismissed the evidence that should have caused a new trial is extraordinary. It's a watch, the dead man that he gave to his son, according to the police, and a couple of years later, it's found on the body, 80 miles, kilometres away from where it's supposed to be. And it was a major piece of evidence linking him with the bodies. And the Court of Appeal said, oh, it doesn't matter. Leave him inside. Well, I don't know how our justice system can do that. Makes no sense to me at all.
So bring us up to date on Scott Watson. What's in the boiling in the pot at the moment that could help him?
Over 3 years ago, he applied to the Governor General for a pardon. He sent in a 22-page submission about why it had happened. He sent in my book. He sent in my film as being the grounds for his application. He's still inside there. The system appointed a QC to examine the case. Now, my book and my film are basically about corrupt practice within the system, the police, the prosecutors, and all the way up. So you would think they would get a QC who had no connection with those officers? Well, they got a QC who had all her career been a Crown prosecutor and otherwise works as counsel for the police. That's who's examining and who has examined the application.
And would she have the courage to
No.
go against the system?
I think not. I think she's been appointed to do a particular thing, and I'm sure that's what she's done. She came out with a report about a year ago, and it's been hassling backwards and forwards between the Ministry of Justice and the defence lawyers. And when that will come to a head, I don't know. But what I do know is that her report could not have absolved Watson. That didn't say let him out, because if it did, he'd be out by now. Therefore, her report says keep him in, and I think they'll fight tooth and nail to keep Scott Watson inside, innocent or guilty.
Now, what drives you, Keith, to investigate these?
My job.
As a journalist?
Yeah, it's my job.
A sense of injustice?
Yes, yeah. But lots of people have that. I mean, the number of people who have contacted me after these books have been published with messages of support, because that's what they think, that's who they are too. They think that's what New Zealand is. They don't think New Zealand is represented properly by its justice system. The
interesting thing is, Keith, where did this investigating, crusading type feeling come from? Tell us a little bit about the early Keith Hunter.
Let's lose the word crusading. I'm not a crusader. Okay. I just do a job as a journalist. I mean, all journalists do. It just happens to be that I find the most satisfaction in this particular area, which is miscarriages of justice, and we also because we have so many of them. If there were fewer and not so many of them, I guess I wouldn't be in there. But there's heaps. There's a lifetime's work involved, available in chasing these cases down. So I just do my job.
What's a day in the life of Keith Hunter? Investigating, looking at new facts,
and looking at probably more often than not looking at old facts and making analyses from them that haven't been made before. My advantage, the way I do things, I come in right at the end of the process when everything's gone and finished, which no one else has done. So I have access to all of the documentation, and I can sit down and read it and analyse it at my leisure. Now, when you're doing it in the courtroom, when the case is up and running,
it's hot and
it's
passionate,
hot and all that, and you don't necessarily see what's going on. You don't think this fact here doesn't make sense with that fact that I read maybe a week ago, and I've forgotten about it anyway. But if you do it later on, when you've got a certain leisure, then you come up with, I think, truths that didn't come out in court. And I believe that's what's happened in it.
And this is what's happened with the case of the Missing Bloodstain. Now we're leaving Scott Watson now. This is the Crewe murders.
Right.
Your feelings, where you were when it actually was hot and passionate, right from the start. You were a spectator, an observer?
I was a spectator, but I was working in television as a current affairs journalist in Auckland, and I had reasonable contact with the Auckland newsroom at the time, the television newsroom, and I knew, and all the journalists knew, and everyone who knew a journalist knew, and everyone who knew a policeman knew, that the killer was a man named Len Demler. The country knew that, by and large. Maybe if you're outside, way outside those circles, you didn't, but everyone with any contact with anyone in the case knew the killer was Jeanette Crewe's father, Len Demler. And suddenly, the killer became somebody else. And that's why it's such a famous case.
How did Len Demler do that? How did he swing the heat away from him? How did he do it?
He didn't.
He didn't?
No, the police swung the heat. The main reason being that they couldn't find Demler's rifle. They thought they could put a rifle against Arthur Thomas. They couldn't find Demler's rifle, so they couldn't put a rifle against him, and that was the event that the situation that changed it.
So how long ago did you suddenly decide, I'm going to go over all the cold facts on this case, analyse them? How did the process start to come up with the case of the Missing Bloodstain?
It was exactly the same as with the Watson affair. I was asked to direct a documentary about in association with a book that was coming out on the Crewe murders, just as I had been with the Watson case. So a strange coincidence, I suppose. But what I found was that going over the material that was going to go into that book, I could go a lot further than the book had. So I put up a proposal after that encompassed the entire story, not just the bits that are in the book. And I started then. That was in 2001, about the same time as the Watson.
So this book really has a gestation period of nearly 10 years.
Yes, that's right.
And what was the book that came out?
It was written by a journalist named Chris Birth. He was a Taupo journalist who'd been following the case since the mid-70s. And he had chased the police through the Official Information Act to get all sorts of documentation from them. Basically what he called the Demler file, which eventually he got, and which he used for his book, and which I've used there His book was called The Final Chapter, which he thought was the final chapter on the cruise in 2001, but it turns out not to have been.
Well, where is the Missing Bloodstain? Where is?
No, you've got to read the book to get that. No.
Give us a clue. Give us a clue.
No, you've got to read the book for that.
Okay, we can't find out about the case until we read the book. Well,
You see, I've tried to write it as like Agatha Christie would write it. All the clues are given all the way through the book, and then at the end you find out exactly what happened, and then you go back and you get and sew it all together. But that way you have the opportunity to sew it together yourself, rather than just have me say so.
And who fed the babies? That's what everybody...
That's pretty obvious, really. I mean, the baby was found, when it was found, there were dirty nappies all over the place. So the dirty nappies on top of the fridge, on the washing machine, in the laundry, in her bed. So for 5 days, clearly, she had eaten something, because otherwise the nappies wouldn't be dirty. Yeah. The other thing was, right by the washing machine, there was a bucket of nappy sand. Now, if that had been a woman with any prior contact with a baby, she would have known what that bucket was, and that's where you put the dirty nappies. So whoever did it didn't know what nappy sand was, and just thought throw the nappies up on the fridge. Well, who would do that? I reckon a grumpy old farmer who'd never had much to do with a baby before. Demler fed the baby. Demler changed the baby. It was Demler.
And what was his anger? He was angry about the fact that...
No, he wasn't angry. He wanted money.
He wanted money?
He wanted money, yes. A while before this, he had been found out by the tax department, and they found out about 1961 that he had diddled them over the previous 10 years, and they fined him and charged him and exacted a penalty, which came to £10,000 altogether.
Which was a lot of money back then.
Absolutely. Now, he didn't have £10,000, but his wife did. She was independently wealthy, so they struck a deal. She paid off his tax bill, and in return for that, she got half of the farm that had always been his alone. So now they become joint owners of the farm. Now, she died about 6 months before Jeanette was murdered, and her will made it quite clear that the farm, her half of his farm, went to Jeanette, but Len could get the returns from it as long as he worked it. So he had the advantage of all returns from it when he worked it. But what the police never realised was that if he sold the farm, Maisie's half of it went to Jeanette. So if he sold the farm, he only got half its costs. Now, he wanted to retire at this point. He had been farming for 40, 50 years. He wanted to get out of the business and go and take life easy.
And he wanted to sell the whole farm.
He wanted to sell the farm.
Yeah,
and
and
he wanted all the money from it, not just the half that had been his and not Maisie's. And that's what caused it all.
So do you think one night he went down there?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And he lost his temper?
No, he went down, he planned it. He took his rifle with him, he went down, he planned it all. Very badly, I have to say. And he shot them, Harvey first in the back of the head from the kitchen, and then Jeanette.
So he must have been overjoyed when they swung their attention to Arthur Allen Thomas. He must have thought, all my Christmases have come at once.
You can see it in his change of evidence as time went on. At the beginning, he told obvious lies to save himself. But as time went on, those lies became truths as he slowly realised that he wasn't going to get charged with it, and he could afford to tell the truth. Yeah. And you can see those changes in the documentation.
So in the case of Arthur Allen Thomas, even though he's been released from jail and he's had a $1 million compensation, it must be irksome for him to know that nobody has actually ever been recharged, have they?
The problem is, and as the Royal Commission has found out at the end of the whole process, this pardon that he had doesn't mean that he didn't do it. What the Court of Appeal said was it doesn't change the facts of the matter. He's legally not guilty. He is deemed to be innocent, but he's not necessarily innocent in fact. Until they actually reopen the case and chase down the reality and the truth, he will always be officially a pardoned murderer, somebody who can't be retried. That's the only thing the pardon does for him. It doesn't say he didn't do it at all. Just he's deemed not to have done it. Very different.
Now look, the police do a great job in protecting us, don't they? Yep. But they can also do a...
They do. They do.
They do a great
and
job.
It's my job as a journalist.
The first person you dial is 111 and you've got the protection of the police, but sometimes you can fall into the crack, can't you?
Yes, you can, but I'd like to make it plain that it's my job to examine those cracks. That's what a journalist is for. That's what we have a press for. That's what the media's function is. And people often come to me and say, why are you such a champion for this or that or this or that? Well, I'm not. I'm just looking in the cracks and digging things out there that should be dug out because the system hasn't worked.
You do have a fascinating life, don't you, Keith? I mean, it is. Would you see it as a fascinating life, investigating these cases?
I suppose so. But a lot of it's just sitting at home looking at a computer.
Yeah.
So it's not quite Perry Mason.
And at what stage do you say, look, I've got enough now, I'll start writing
when
the
it
book?
all comes together. Like writing this book, the last real realization I had was in some ways the most important of them, because it was the realization that sewed the entire thing together. And it was one event which I didn't know about it because I never asked myself the right question. See, my job, in fact, the function is to find the question. It's not the answer. If you can find the question, generally the answer is inside the question. So it's finding the questions that matter.
What was your last big revelation?
That's in there too.
Well, look, if you're as fascinated as I am to find the answers, we're going to give 3 of these books away.
Oh, great.
3 books away. It's called The Case of the Missing Bloodstain, all about the Crewe murders. And we've got 3 of these wonderful books to give away. And we need a question. We need a question, Keith, and I reckon that they have to put in the subject line to qualify to be one of the winners. They have to write The Case of the Missing Bloodstain.
I think that's fair enough.
Now, if you miss out on one of these books, because we're only giving 3 away, where can you purchase this book, Keith?
Bookshops will have it currently, or it's available from my website, which is hunterproductions.co.nz. hunterproductions.co.nz. They can Google you and find you, and you can buy this book off your website. That's right, or from the local bookshop.
Are we allowed to know the price, or
it's $37.99.
$37.99. 99 cents worth of great reading.
Right. It is too.
Of course, as the years go by, less and less people, like the baby boomers, I mean, we're still thoroughly fascinated by this case, but a lot of younger people don't know much about it. But there's still a lot of baby boomers left that would love to know.
Well, it's interesting for 2 reasons. It answers all of the questions, and also it's an interesting story just on the basis of the story itself as it progresses. It's really like a detective story because that's what you need to think of it as.
Even as we talk here today, I bet you're working on another case. Are we allowed to hear what you're working on?
There are things in the Watson case that I'm going to go back to because it's not over yet, and the system hasn't finished with him.
Any other court cases that have cropped up?
Oh, look, there are a few. Mark Lundy is one I'd like to be involved with. David Tamaheri is another one. Those 2 stand out for me at the moment, whether I'll get around to doing them or not, but I'm very, very keen on both.
So you could be called Mr. Cold Case.
Oh, you might. Oh, these aren't cold. They're not cold.
They're still hot to a lot of people, aren't they? Yeah. But they're, the television program where they look at the old evidence and that. Look, Keith, wonderful to have you on the program today. As I say, 2003, I watched your documentary on the Scott Watson case, and I thought it was just brilliant. So you do a marvellous job.
That too is available.
Is it? Okay.
Thanks,
Keith Hunter. We'll see you soon.